Hello guys, and welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be doing a code review in our Unity Minecraft series. Now, we're going to start off with our world game object script here. As you can see, these scripts are in order. So first the world game object script is called, and it calls all the other scripts. Then the world script is called, then the world data, then the dual layer with medium values, then the standard tree decorator. So we're going to start off with the world game object, and we're going to kind of go over what everything does. So as you can see here, we just have our variables. Pretty simple. We have our world data, our world, all that stuff. That's simple and does not need to be explained. Alright, we have our start function that calls everything. It sets everything. So it generates the world, it initializes the textures, it sets the player position, it sets the world data, it sets the chunks and all that stuff. And also like the decorations. So that's pretty simple. That's the start function. It's a private function. Then we have our create world chunk prefab function right here. So we create our, we set our chunks to be a transform, and then we generate them here. Just pretty simple. We're going to set the chunk to world data.chunks. We're going to set the position of the chunk. Then we're going to instantiate the chunk. We're going to set the parent and the name and also the scripts that it has. So that's pretty simple right there. Alright, then we have our start time. And then in our update function, we have regenerating chunks. So basically we're going to regenerate the chunks and we're going to wait a couple of seconds. Alright, then we're going to finish the chunk. Then we're going to process the player input and display the diggings. So that just means when we break pretty much. Next, we're going to initialize the textures. So we're going to world texture atlas use new texture 2D 2048. That's just like the size of the texture. Then we have our world texture atlas UVs and stuff like that. Just setting all those. We set our textures to like the filter mode, and then we generate our UV coordinates for all of our blocks. Process player input. That's pretty simple. That's basically just like breaking a block and stuff like that. As you can see here. And T just regenerates the chunk, so that's also pretty simple. Alright. That's function there. Next function down here is our process all chunks at once boolean here. So in this function, we just create a finished chunk. You guys can read over that. You can kind of get what that says. Down here, application quit, pretty simple, and display diggings basically displays when we dig a block up. Okay, so that's that script right there. It's pretty simple. I'm kind of barely going over it, just kind of showing you guys what it's called and stuff like that in each of the scripts. You can probably go through and do this yourself, but if you really don't want to, then you can just follow the rest of the video. Alright, next up, our world script here. Okay, so we have our different read-only scripts, like iTrain generation, world data, mesh generation, world decorator, stuff like that. Pretty simple. We have our world, so like our world script here. So the world equals iWorld, so this is basically the function for the script that gets called automatically. There we go. That's basically we're setting all the scripts over here to something. We're setting it to what gets called in here. Okay, in here we initialize the grid for the chunks, like the grid that each of the chunks are going to go on. Then we generate the world finally. Alright, so we find all the visible chunks, we find all the chunks, we start, we generate it, we debug log the time that it took to generate it. Then after we generate the terrain, we generate the decorations. And then after we generate the decorations and the terrain, we generate the lighting. And then we clear regeneration status down here. And if there's anything else that needs to be generated, this is where it would go. Okay? So we generate world decorations, which is basically calling another function from another script that we'll go over later. Alright. Clear regeneration status is just chunk needs generating equals false, so we're not going to generate anything. So generate lighting, basically, again, call a different script. Generate terrain, call a different script. And that's pretty simple. We have our chunk compare by distance from map center, so like the map center, just comparing from the map center, that way it can generate more chunks later. Regenerating the chunks, regenerate the target chunk first, followed by others that need regeneration. Now, these two functions here don't really need to be gone over, but this function is very important. It's the remove block at. So here we have block equals get block. This is basically stuff we did in another tutorial. This is in the future. So when you're seeing this video, it's when the 4th and 5th video haven't gone out, but I've actually already recorded those videos and have them ready to upload. Alright, so that's just stuff from that. All this stuff is stuff from that, so that doesn't need to be gone over. Now down here, we set our world data, so we're going to regenerate the chunk. We're going to regenerate the lighting, because we break the block, so it's going to be different. And then we regenerate the chunk without the block. Now down here, fire new cap. It's basically this, but in a large area. So you guys probably can guess what that is. Here we have our digging amount, our digging location, our last dig time, and our dig duration. Okay? Public void dig. This is also important. This is basically the function that sets how long it takes for us to break a certain block and stuff like that. So our current dig time, our target location, and basically you can see here, right here, is where we remove the block. So after all of our waiting and stuff, we're going to remove the block. Then also we have a function that destroys the chunk. Alright. Now we're going to go over to our world data script, because that's also an important script. In this script, we basically set our UV coordinates, and the rest of the stuff is just chunk stuff, as you can see. Now, one other script we need to go over for you to understand how it works is the block script. So basically, we have our blocks here. So this is where you create your blocks. You have your block name and your ID for that block. So as you can see, like air is 255, and you can extend this to as many blocks as you want. It's pretty simple. As you can see here, we have different sides for our blocks. So you have a bottom, a side, a top, and all that stuff. And we have different numbers corresponding to those two. We have our block type, our light amount, and our block UV coordinates. And this is basically all our block UV coordinates right there. Alright? So again, that's a simple script that's just setting what the block is and how it works, all the data for the block. And you can add more data to this, like what block is broken by what, and stuff like that. So it's pretty simple. Okay. We've already gone over a bunch of scripts, and now we're going to go over our terrain generation script. So this is the script that generates all of our terrain. It's it's a very important script, because without this, nothing would generate. Okay, so here we have our chunks, so our chunk width, our height, and stuff like that. That's important because you need to know how big it is for us to generate our grid. Then we have a for to x equals 0, all that stuff here. Basically, if the chunk width is this, and add this, and stuff like that. Alright. Down here we have our chunk block x. This is basically, again, checking the chunk size. And now we're going to check right here what's lower ground and what's higher ground. So if it's lower ground, then, well, what is considered lower ground? What is below the level of dirt? And what is above? So I guess mountains and stuff like that would be above. So I guess that would be created out of stone. Then we create a boolean here, sunlit. So if it's sunlit, then do this or do that, right? So we're going to check our depth. Everything above ground height is air, so if it's above ground height, then it's going to be air. Alright, down here, if we're lower than ground height, then we're going to see if we can add some caves or valleys or something like that. Now, if we have a cave, draw air there. Alright, now else, if it's sunlit, so if it is sunlit, then we're going to add topsoil. And that's basically adding that block, and then sunlit is going to be equal to false after the topsoil. So the first block is always going to be topsoil, because it's always going to be sunlit, and after that block, there's not going to be any grass, because it's not sunlit. Else is going to be equal to dirt, as you can see, and if it's cave noise, so if the cave noise is equal to 0.2 F, then it's going to be stone, and over here is where the cave noise is set, right here. Alright? Now, if we're lower than ground height level, and if we're sunlit, then again, block type is soil, but else block type equals dirt. And these are the functions for getting our upper ground height and our lower ground height. We don't really need to go over those. You can kind of just read them. And after we generate our terrain, we generate our decorations. So here is one of our decoration classes. We start off by setting our standard tree decorator, so our world data. Then we decorate, and we check if it's a valid location to place it, then create the decoration. Now, we get that valid location from this function here. So if we don't want too many trees to make it a 1% chance, you can change that if you want to. Now, we also don't want the trees to grow too high, so we're going to set that. And we kind of want a minimum amount of space for the trees to grow. That way, it's not growing into the stone or into the dirt. Now, if all of these is true, then we're going to create a decoration here. We're going to set the trunk length. And then we're going to create the trunk, and then we're going to create a sphere of leaves at a certain location, block X and block Y, which is set from our create decoration, which is set here, which then is set somewhere in another script. Okay. Now, we're going to create the middle is going to be at the top of the trunk here. And then the size of the sphere is random. Now we're going to create the sphere, and that's basically vector distance, and that's pretty simple, just like the radius and stuff like that. And then we're going to set the block type to leaves. Down here, create the trunk. That's going to be log. Over here, space is empty, so if the space above is empty, then we're going to return false. That way we can create the block. And over here we have our string. That way we can see what tree is what and what this is at, what, you know. All right. So that is our basic scripts there. There's a couple of scripts that are also important, but they're not as important. You guys can probably go over them yourselves and read them and guess what they mean. High terrain generation method basically sets void generate terrain, which is pretty simple. So basically generating terrain data for a chunk. All right, that's simple. And we have nothing else really other than like a decoration, which is just decorate, void decorate. Doesn't really need to be said. As you can probably guess, it's just decorating everything. Okay. And we have our cave generation.txt, which is basically a script that doesn't really need to be called right now. Okay. So that is it for this video. I'm just basically going over some scripts. As you saw, it's very much so not necessary to the series. You don't have to watch this video, even though you already did. So, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one when we do our second part, sorry, of our Minecraft series.